Varos's fiery gaze swept across the battlefield, his mind racing as he took in the overwhelming sight of the endless horde swarming beyond the wall. The White Walkers were careful, calculated, their leaders directing the Whites without exposing themselves fully. The Night King remained hidden, cloaked within the icy mist that enveloped the battlefield. Varos knew this had to change. If the Night King stayed hidden, the battle would grind on until the living were overwhelmed. They needed to draw him out to force his hand. Slowly, Varos's eyes drifted to Scourge, who crouched near the ritual flame, his molten orange eyes gleaming with anticipation. Without a word, Varos tilted his head toward the horde. Scourge's gaze met his master's, and a shared understanding passed between them. The massive dragon stretched his wings and let out a deafening roar that echoed across the battlefield, shaking the very air. Soldiers across the wall and below turned their eyes skyward, watching as Scourge took flight, his black and red scales gleaming against the night. Scourge flew high over the wall, his immense form silhouetted against the icy mist. He did not attack the Whites nearest the wall, as Varos had instructed. Such an action could compromise the ancient magic that held the wall together. Instead, the dragon soared further out, his powerful wings carrying him deep into the heart of the horde. From the corner of their eyes, the defenders on the wall caught the faintest glimpse of Scourge descending. Then, with a guttural roar that seemed to split the heavens, Scourge unleashed his fire. It was not an ordinary blaze. The dragonfire carved a path of destruction so intense it melted the snow and ice in its wake, burning with a heat so fierce it disrupted the Night King's fog, revealing glimpses of the battlefield that had been shrouded in icy darkness. The Whites caught in the inferno were incinerated instantly, their shrieks swallowed by the roaring flames. The line of fire that Scourge carved through the horde was not just a physical divide, it was a psychological one. The horde that had seemed endless now appeared segmented, disrupted. The defenders of the wall could see a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. And then it happened. For a fleeting moment, as the fire swept across the battlefield, the Night King was visible. His icy regal form stood still amidst the chaos, his glowing blue eyes fixed on Scourge with an unsettling calm. The soldiers on the wall who caught sight of him froze, their breaths stolen by the sight of the ancient, otherworldly figure. The moment was brief, but it was enough. One of the White Walkers on horseback, positioned near the Night King, raised an icy spear and hurled it with inhuman precision toward Scourge. The spear flew through the air like a frozen comet, its icy surface glinting ominously. But as it struck Scourge, the spear disintegrated upon impact, shattering like a brittle popsicle hitting unyielding rock. The force of the attack didn't even slow the dragon, who responded with a defiant roar, his flames sweeping through another swath of the undead. The line of fire Scourge had created gave Varos's elite troops the time they desperately needed. The soldiers in the tunnel, bolstered by the sudden reprieve, began to push the Whites back. Their dragonglass weapons flashed in the light of the fire, cutting through the undead with renewed vigor. The Valyrian phalanx reformed, driving the Whites back toward the entrance, regaining the ground they had lost. From his vantage point, Varos watched the unfolding scene, his expression a mixture of satisfaction and caution. Scourge's fire had disrupted the horde and bought the defenders valuable time, but the Night King's reaction was what concerned him most. The fleeting glimpse of the Night King had confirmed that he was not far, but his calm demeanor suggested he was waiting, watching, and planning. "Not yet," Varos muttered under his breath. "You'll show yourself soon enough." On the wall, Robert, Stannis, and Ned had seen the Night King too, if only for a second. Robert's face was a mix of awe and grim determination. "So that's him," he said, gripping his warhammer tightly. "The icy bastard himself." Stannis's expression was stoic as ever. "He's not invincible, but he's cautious. He'll wait for the right moment." Ned's gaze was fixed on the battlefield. "And we'll be ready when he does." As Scourge soared back toward the wall, his mighty roars reverberating through the frozen air, the defenders below regrouped. The line of fire remained a glowing scar on the battlefield, a testament to the living's resolve and the power they wielded. For now, The tide of the battle had turned, but everyone knew this was only the beginning. The Night King had been revealed, if only for a moment. The question now was not if he would act, but when, and whether the living would be ready to face him when he did. The chaotic sounds of battle echoed across the icy battlefield as the defenders rallied against the unrelenting onslaught. Robert Baratheon, standing on the battlements, roared commands to the soldiers below. His voice carried across the cold winds, filled with urgency and authority. "Send more soldiers to the tunnel," Robert bellowed, his warhammer gleaming in the firelight. "Reinforce the Valyrians. Archers, get to the walls. Dragonglass on every arrow. Rain death on those icy bastards." The knights, bannermen, and soldiers from every house responded immediately, their movements swift despite the freezing cold. The archers, already stationed atop the wall, took aim and unleashed volley after volley of dragonglass-dipped arrows, their shafts piercing the endless tide of whites below. The dark sky above the wall lit up with the streaks of arrows, their paths illuminated by the flickering fires of the battlefield. On the battlements, Daenerys Targaryen stood near one of Varos's fire priests, the ritual flame from their earlier chants still burning nearby. The priest, dressed in crimson robes lined with intricate runes, stared into the fire, his face illuminated by its ethereal glow. He began to chant in a deep, resonant voice, the ancient words of Valyria rising with the crackling of the flames. "As ice and fire meet," the priest intoned, his voice steady and almost hypnotic. "The prince that was promised shall forge the empire of Valyria anew. From this war will rise the flame that will consume the world and reshape it." Daenerys's heart skipped a beat at the priest's words. She had always believed her destiny was tied to fire, to the dragons and the legacy of her house. But this was something far greater. Varos's ambitions were not confined to Westeros. He was looking beyond to a vision of a new Valyrian empire, forged not just in survival but in conquest. Her violet eyes narrowed as she turned to the fire priest. "Who is the prince that was promised?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing within her. The fire priest glanced at her, his eyes flickering with the reflection of the flames. "The flames do not speak names, your grace, only purpose, but the fire burns brighter in some." Daenerys's jaw tightened, her thoughts racing. She glanced at Varos, standing on a platform near the tunnel, his fiery gaze fixed on the battle. He seemed larger than life, his presence commanding the battlefield as if he were a force of nature. As she watched, she saw something unsettling. His movements had become sharper, more deliberate, and his power seemed to grow with every passing moment. There was an aura around him now, as if the flames themselves were answering his call. The unease spread like frost across Daenerys's face. She turned her gaze to the other commanders. The same concern was reflected in their expressions. Ned Stark, grim and calculating, stood at Robert's side. He caught Daenerys's glance and saw the worry etched in her features. It was a worry they all shared. Ned moved closer to Daenerys, his tone low but firm. "You've heard something," he said, his piercing eyes searching hers. "What is it?" Daenerys hesitated, her instincts urging her to keep the fire priest's words to herself. But she also knew Ned Stark was a man of honor, someone who could understand the gravity of what was unfolding. "The fire priest," she said quietly, "spoke of a prophecy, the prince that was promised. He said this war will forge the empire of Valyria anew." Ned's expression darkened, his voice grim. "Valyria, Varos's ambitions are larger than we thought." "They are," Daenerys admitted, glancing again at Varos. "And I think he sees this war as more than a battle for survival. To him, it's the first step in something far greater." Ned turned his gaze to Varos, his brows furrowing. "We fight for the living, but Varos, he fights for fire, and fire, uncontrolled, can destroy as much as it can protect." As the two spoke, the battle below intensified. Varos, standing near the tunnel, raised his hand, and his elite soldiers responded with renewed ferocity. His voice carried through the chaos, his commands sharp and precise. Each word seemed to ignite a flame in the hearts of his men, and they fought with a fury that bordered on supernatural. The whites were slowly being pushed back, their advance faltering as the defenders held their ground. But as Varos grew more ferocious, his presence seemed almost otherworldly. His movements were fluid, his gestures commanding, as if he were channeling something far beyond mortal strength. The fire around him burned brighter, and even the whites seemed to hesitate in his presence, their icy forms recoiling from his aura. From the wall, Stannis Baratheon, ever watchful, narrowed his eyes. "Varos," he muttered. "He's no ordinary man." "Ordinary or not," Robert growled, "if he keeps those dead bastards at bay, he can call himself a bloody god for all I care." But for Daenerys, Ned, and others watching, the growing power of Varos was not just a reassurance, it was a warning. The balance of the battle was shifting, and while the living held the upper hand for now, the stakes were far greater than they had imagined. As ice and fire clashed, the flames of ambition burned brighter, threatening to consume not just the dead but everything in their path. The horizon became a swirling nightmare as the horde of mammoths, giants, and other grotesque beasts emerged through the blizzard. Their monstrous forms loomed over the battlefield, each step shaking the frozen ground. The sheer scale of the advancing army was unfathomable, a living tide of death and destruction that stretched as far as the eye could see. The snow, already thick, seemed to churn unnaturally as the Night King prepared to reveal the full might of his power. From his vantage point atop the wall, Varos watched the advancing force with grim determination. His fiery eyes burned brighter as the icy mist began to reform, cloaking the horde in an eerie shroud. The defenders could see little more than the faint shapes of the undead army, their glowing blue eyes flickering like stars in the storm. Varos raised his hand, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Trebuchets, fire!" At the base of the wall, the trebuchets, loaded and prepared, unleashed their payloads. Massive barrels arced through the air, their flight barely clearing the battlements. The soldiers atop the wall ducked instinctively as the barrels soared overhead, the tension palpable. Robert Baratheon, standing near the trebuchets, shielded his eyes as he watched the projectiles descend toward the horde. "Seven hells Valyrian," he roared. "What's in those barrels?" Varos turned his fiery gaze toward Robert, his voice calm and unyielding. "Wildfire." The barrels struck the advancing horde, shattering on impact. An instant later, the frozen wasteland erupted into chaos as green flames ignited, spreading like liquid death across the battlefield. The wildfire consumed everything in its path, its unnatural heat melting snow and ice in an instant. The air filled with the unholy screams of the whites, their icy forms disintegrating in the inferno. But the onslaught was far from over. As the wildfire spread, Maelstrom let out an earth-shaking roar and took to the skies. His massive wings sliced through the air as he descended upon the horde, his presence a force of nature. With a guttural growl, the dragon unleashed a torrent of red fire, his flames mingling with the green wildfire below. The combined blaze created an inferno of unimaginable intensity, incinerating everything in its wake. The defenders atop the wall stared in stunned awe as the battlefield below became a sea of flame. Over 100,000 whites, along with mammoths, giants, and other abominations, were reduced to ash in moments. The unrelenting tide of death was brought to a halt, the once formidable horde obliterated by the combined power of dragonfire and wildfire. Robert turned to Ned Stark, his face a mixture of awe and horror. "If that's the Valyrian way of doing things, I'm bloody glad he's on our side." Ned said nothing, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon where the flames burned brightest. His jaw tightened as he saw the faint outline of a figure, the Night King, standing unmoved amidst the destruction. The icy mist that cloaked him seemed to resist the flames, his glowing blue eyes locked on the wall. The Night King raised one hand, his movements deliberate and unhurried. The flames flickered, as though responding to his presence, and the mist began to thicken once more. His snarling expression, so rarely seen, conveyed a cold rage that sent a chill through even the most battle-hardened soldiers. "He's not done," Stannis said grimly, stepping up beside Robert. This was just his opening move. From atop the battlements, Varros watched as the Night King began to advance. His figure flanked by an elite guard of White Walkers, each carrying weapons that glinted with icy malevolence. The remaining Whites, still numbering in the tens of thousands, began to move forward with renewed purpose, their glowing eyes fixated on the wall. Varros's fiery gaze burned brighter as he raised his hand once more. "Prepare the dragons." Above, Scourge and Vermilion let out deafening roars, their massive forms circling the wall as they awaited their master's command. Below, Maelstrom continued to lay waste to the horde, his flames carving paths of destruction through the undead ranks. Daenerys, standing near a fire priest, turned to Varros, her voice filled with urgency. "This is it, isn't it? The true battle." Varros's expression was unreadable, his voice steady but carrying a weight that silenced even the howling wind. "The Night King reveals his hand. The fire must hold, or the living will fall." As the Night King and his elite guard advanced, the battlefield grew eerily quiet, save for the crackling of the flames. The defenders atop the wall braced themselves, their weapons ready, their resolve unshaken. But all could feel it. The true battle was about to begin, and the fate of the living hung by the thinnest of threads.